Hey, welcome back. Go ahead and dim the lights, get your blanket just right, and settle in. I've got 3 stories for you tonight. There's a little sweet revenge, a mystery that stays with you, and honestly, the middle one still gives me chills. For 3 years, my neighbor parked his enormous truck across my driveway every single morning, and for 3 years he laughed in my face about it. His name was Dwight, and he owned a lifted black pickup that he treated like a member of the family. My driveway was the only flat spot on our steep little street, and Dwight decided that the bottom third of it, right where it met the road, was the perfect place to leave his truck while he loaded his fishing gear. The first time I asked him to move, he smiled and said the road was public property and I couldn't prove where my line ended. Technically, he was blocking me in, but he always left just enough room that I couldn't call it a full blockage. I complained to the homeowners association. Nothing. I put down cones. He ran them over. I even offered to shake his hand and start fresh. And he told me, and I quote, that I should buy a smaller car if I had a problem. So I stopped complaining. I got quiet and Dwight loved it. He thought he'd won. What Dwight didn't know was that the previous owner of my house had never actually recorded the correct property survey. When I bought the place, my closing attorney flagged it and told me to get it fixed someday. For 3 years, I hadn't bothered. Now I bothered. I hired a licensed surveyor. He came out with his tripod and his little orange flags. And when he was done, he told me something wonderful. The strip of pavement Dwight parked on every morning? It wasn't the road at all. The county road actually ended 6 feet further down the hill. That strip was recorded, deeded, taxed private property, and it belonged to me. Dwight had been parking on my land the entire time, calling it public. I didn't say a word to him. Instead, I got a permit and had a low steel bollard installed right at the true property line, the kind that locks into a sleeve in the concrete. Perfectly legal, perfectly mine. I put a nice reflective cap on it so nobody could say I hid it. The next Saturday at 6 in the morning, I heard the crunch. Not a big crash, just a slow, expensive scrape. Dwight had backed into it in the dark, like he always did. Except this time, there was something there. He came pounding on my door, purple in the face, screaming that I had damaged his truck and he was calling the police. I said, please do. I even called them myself to be helpful. The officer took one look at the fresh survey stakes, the permit taped inside my window, and the bollard sitting comfortably on my deed line. Then he asked Dwight why his truck was parked on private property. Dwight sputtered about 3 years of tradition. The officer explained very patiently that 3 years of trespassing is still trespassing and that the damage to the truck was Dwight's own fault for reversing into a legal fixture on land he didn't own. But here's the part that made it perfect. Because Dwight had spent 3 years insisting to everyone that the strip was public, the HOA had records of his own emails saying so. When my attorney sent a friendly letter noting that Dwight had been storing his truck and gear on my property without permission and that I could have been charging him a monthly parking fee that entire time, Dwight suddenly got very interested in settling. We settled. He paid to repair his own truck, he paid my survey costs, and he signed a written acknowledgement of my property line that got recorded with the county forever. His fishing buddies still bring it up at the neighborhood cookout. Dwight parks 2 streets over now, down by the mailboxes, and he walks his gear up the hill every morning. Sometimes he passes my driveway, wide open and empty, and he doesn't laugh anymore. He just keeps walking, and I wave, because I am a friendly neighbor, and the road, after all, is public property. Every night at 3:17, the smart speaker in my rental cottage said a single number out loud, and it was always one lower than the night before. The first night I barely woke up. I heard a soft voice say 41, rolled over, and told myself I'd dreamed it. The second night I was awake, staring at the ceiling, when the little speaker on the shelf lit up blue and said 40. Not in the assistant's normal chirpy voice. Slower, almost tired. I'd rented the cottage for a 2-month writing retreat, cheap because it was off-season and half an hour from anything. The owner, a quiet man named Peter, had left me a laminated welcome sheet with the Wi-Fi password and a note that said, if the house does anything strange, please just let it. I'd assumed that was charming rural humor. By night 5, the number was 37. I unplugged the speaker. I actually pulled it out of the wall, wrapped the cord around it, and shut it in a drawer in the kitchen. At 3:17, I heard it again, muffled from inside the drawer, saying 36, even though it had no power. That was when I stopped sleeping properly. I called Peter. He didn't sound surprised. He asked me what number it was on, and when I told him 36, he went silent for a long moment and said, "So it's still going." He said he'd come by in the morning to explain and asked me to please not leave before then. Something in the way he said it made me stay. He arrived with a cardboard box under his arm and a thermos of coffee, like a man who'd done this before. He sat at the kitchen table and told me the cottage had belonged to his sister, Ruth. Ruth had lived alone out here for years, and she'd been going blind. She couldn't read a clock anymore, so she'd trained the speaker to tell her the time whenever she woke, which was often, at odd hours, frightened. Her worst hours had always been the early morning ones, so she'd set up a routine she never told anyone about until the end. Every night before bed, she would ask the speaker to start a countdown, one number a night, from 100. She told her brother it was so she'd always know how many good nights she had left in her, that it kept her from being afraid of the dark, because a number felt like company. When the count got low, she said, she'd know it was time. Ruth had passed away 4 years ago. Peter opened the cardboard box. Inside was her original speaker and a spiral notebook where she'd logged every single night. The last entry in her handwriting was the number 38. She had died in her sleep the night she would have said 37. I felt the hair go up on my arms because 37 was the number I'd heard on night 5. Peter turned to a fresh page near the back, and there, in a different pen, were more numbers. 36, 35, written by guests. Every renter who'd ever stayed long enough had heard the count pick up exactly where Ruth left off and continue, one lower each night, as if the house were finishing what she started. Nobody had ever made it to the bottom because nobody ever stayed long enough. They always fled around the 20s. I asked him the obvious question, what happens at 0? He said honestly, he didn't know. Nobody had ever had the nerve to find out. He looked at me and asked if I wanted to keep going or if he should refund the rest of my stay right now. I thought about Ruth, alone in the dark, counting herself company, and I told Peter I'd stay to the end. I'm on night 16 now. Tonight the house will say 20. It doesn't scare me anymore. At 3:17 I lie awake and wait for the soft blue light, and when the number comes I say it back out loud so that whoever is counting knows this time they're not counting alone. My husband told me we couldn't afford a honeymoon, and I believed him for 4 years until the bank called me by the wrong name. I was standing in the branch trying to deposit a refund check, and the teller looked at her screen, smiled and said, "Of course. And how is the second account doing? Mrs. Carraway." My last name is not Carraway. My husband's last name is Lund. Mine is Ellison, because I'd kept my own. I laughed and told her she must have the wrong person. She frowned at her screen, apologized, and quickly closed the window, but I'd already seen the little flash of panic cross her face. The look of someone who has just said something they shouldn't have. I went home and I didn't say anything, because 13 years of marriage teaches you when to talk and when to gather. Daniel and I had married young and broke. He handled the money because I traveled for work, and he was better with spreadsheets, or that's what we'd always said. Every year on our anniversary, I brought up a honeymoon, some little trip, anything, and every year Daniel showed me our accounts, the mortgage, the car, the tight monthly math. And every year I nodded and let it go. I trusted him completely. That was the whole tragedy of it, really. I trusted him so completely that I never once looked. The name Carraway stuck in my head like a splinter. That night, while Daniel slept, I opened his laptop. He'd never bothered to hide much because he'd never imagined I'd look. His email was signed in. And there, in a folder labeled taxes, which I'd never had reason to open because Daniel did our taxes, were statements for an account I'd never heard of. A joint account, joint with a woman named Melissa Carraway. They'd opened it 6 years ago. There was $41,000 in it. Our honeymoon money, the money we never had, plus interest, sitting in an account with another woman's name beside his. I could have screamed. I could have woken him up and thrown the laptop at his head. Instead, I photographed everything. Every statement, every transfer, every little automatic deposit from Daniel's paycheck that he told me was going toward our retirement. Then I closed the laptop, put it back exactly where he'd left it, and I went to sleep next to him like nothing had happened, and I slept better than I had in months, because now I knew. The next morning, I called a lawyer instead of going to work. Here's the part that Daniel never accounted for. In our state, that joint account opened during our marriage with marital income was still marital property regardless of whose name was on it. Melissa, it turned out, was not a girlfriend. She was his college ex, and the account was something worse and colder than an affair. They'd been quietly building a nest egg together, planning, my lawyer suspected, for Daniel to eventually leave. He'd been robbing our marriage to fund his exit from it, one paycheck at a time, while showing me spreadsheets about why I couldn't have a trip to the coast. So I let him keep planning. For 3 more weeks, I said nothing. I let him kiss me goodbye. I let him tell me, on our anniversary no less, that maybe next year we could finally afford to get away. I actually smiled and said I'd like that. Then my lawyer froze the account. Daniel found out when he tried to move the money, panicking, probably tipped off by Melissa. He came home white as paper and asked me if I knew anything about a hold on an account. I looked at him across the kitchen where he'd spent 13 years lying to me with a straight face, and I said, "You mean the honeymoon fund?" The divorce split everything, including that $41,000, right down the middle. My half came to just over $20,000. I took the trip alone, 2 weeks on the coast, in a little white hotel with blue shutters, watching the tide come in every evening. I paid for all of it out of the honeymoon fund my husband swore we never had. And every single night, I slept like the ocean owed me nothing. If you made it this far, let me know down in the comments which story was your favorite, and I'll see you in the next one.